When it comes to Ogryn, it's time to go big or go home. Hey everyone, Bront CatHerder here. We're talking Raid Shadow Legends and we're having fun in Faction Wars with the Derping Through Faction Wars series. This time we're talking Ogryn, the big lovable ogres of the Ogryn faction, and we're here to talk about how you can derp your way through Faction Wars. Now, what does DERP stand for? DERP stands for damage, enhancers, revivers, and protectors. The idea is you build your team, you have at least one of each of these roles covered. Ideally, maybe you have 2 or 3 damage dealers, 2 or 3 protectors, or maybe even 2 or 3 enhancers, depending on how you do. Should help you get your team built for Faction Wars, identifying what champions fill what roles, and building a cohesive team that can get you through the faction. So let's talk about the Ogryn. All right, talking about Ogryn rares, there's not a lot here to talk about. Ogryn Jailer technically has the biggest multipliers of any champion in Raid, but don't confuse that with somebody that does a lot of damage. He can do okay on one of his things, but he's not a long-term solution for anything in this faction. There are 2 outstanding rares here in Ogryn's, however. Bellower is an absolutely amazing champion. Bellower can be a damage dealer. Bellower can be an enhancer. Bellower can be a protector. You can possibly build him for all 3 of them, but generally you want to pick 1 or 2 of those lanes and go for it. He has decreased speed, decreased attack, decreased defense. I believe he's got decreased accuracy. He's got 3 different AoE attacks. All of them hit for fairly hard. He's actually a really good campaign farmer. So you can build him as a campaign farmer, and if you build him as a fast campaign farmer that's double hitting the waves, he is a great damage dealer for Faction Wars. If you want to build him as a debuffer, you can certainly put accuracy on him as well. If you want to build him in a stun set, he can be a protector as well, in addition to, of course, all the debuffs that he's trying to bring. So the accuracy would help, but it's not needed. In fact, every time I've used him for Faction Wars, I've mainly used him for damage. But he is a very, very good champion, definitely worth building, possibly even building 2 of just for this faction. The other one worth mentioning is Gear Grinder. There are no epic revivers in this faction. Gear Grinder is one of these few rare revivers. He's actually a decent reviver. He's got a revive, I think it's 2 random champions on a 5-turn cooldown. It's not great, but he also has some healing in his kit, and he also does some continuous heals on his A1. He's also super, super tanky. He's got a lot of HP for a rare, and he's honestly got a lot of HP for an epic as well. So he is a possible other champion you could build that would be fine for the final stages of Faction Wars. So you've actually got 2 rares here that would be great to build for Faction Wars. They are both void rares, so I realize those are a little harder to get, but ideally you should pull enough voids at some point to get yourself a Bellower and a Gear Grinder. There is a variety of Ogryn epics, several damage dealers, including you've got Skrank, who's a burner and can do a decent amount of damage. Uragrim, who is actually a very, very good champion. He does poisons, he does continuous heals, he's got cleanses. He can be very tanky. He can be built to solo some of the dragon and ice golem things all the way up to 25. So he is well worth building if you get your hands on a Uragrim. He's also got a great aura, useful in all kinds of content. He could actually hard carry this faction. In fact, I've actually had him built to solo floor 21 to farm food. Not that I would ever recommend farming food in Ogryn. It's not worth it. There's not a lot of XP you get in Faction Wars. But definitely a great champion to build. Grush the Mangler, one of the champions you get from the daily login. I believe he is day 240. He is actually a really good champion. He gets slept on a lot because oftentimes by day 240, a lot of people don't need him. Grush can hit really hard. He's got 2 different AoEs. He also puts out continuous heals. He also puts out leech. He also puts out decrease attack. So he can smack, and he can bring a bunch of debuffs as well as a protector. You could even throw him in a stun set if you needed to with 2 AoEs, although not as effective as like a Bellower. Very, very good champion. I'd actually recommend building him for Faction Wars as well. Other champions you might find useful. Maneater is a great champion. Maneater, of course, of the Bad Eater and several other unkillable clan boss teams. Maneater in those unkillable teams is also usable in Faction Wars. The only real difference is where in Clan Boss you don't really want the accuracy. In Faction Wars, you want the accuracy. He brings he brings an A1 that puts decreased attack to everybody. He has a turn meter steal in his A2 that can actually prevent the boss from taking turns if you get two man-eaters going back to back. And of course, obviously, with his unkillable and block buffs, he can be very, very valuable against the boss, which we'll talk about a little bit. Other ones that are not void, we have Siege Hulk, who can actually hit really, really hard. He's a bit of a glass cannon. Siege Hulk also can provide some debuffs. He's got decreased defense as well in his kit. Siege Hulk is actually a good champion to think about building. On the support side, for an enhancer, you've got Ugo, who can do some enhancement and protection. Ugo is a beast in Hydra because Ugo has a decreased defense and block buffs on a single skill. Very good, can effectively lock out the Valks with one skill. Ugo also has a heal with a small cleanse, only cleanses one debuff and possibly block healing, and then does a decent heal. But that can be enough to get you through Faction Wars as well, and it's a very good champion to have in a lot of other endgame content as well, so Ugo is well worth building. Ugo also has Leech on the A1 to bring additional healing. Ugo's a great champion. Claude can bring a lot of support. He can bring increased speed. He can push your turn meter up. He brings increased accuracy as well. He's a great champion. He does some additional healing as well in some of his passives. But really, he's more of a turn meter pusher and a support champion for increasing your accuracy. Useful champion, not bad if you have to build him. I think you can probably do a little bit better for Faction Wars, but he does enough to be worthwhile considering for Faction Wars. As far as other protectors go, Lorne the Cutter brings some decreased attack. He's not bad. He's possibly usable. And then Shatterbones. Shatterbones is got a lot of turn meter control with AoEs. He can do okay damage, worth considering. And finally, Skullcrusher. I cannot forget about Skullcrusher. Skullcrusher puts counterattack on everybody else as well as an ally protection on everybody else and then an unkillable on himself. So he can help you tank an awful lot of damage and bring some additional damage yourself by putting some counterattack on. Now, counterattack is not the most reliable way to do damage, but it's bonus damage that you wouldn't have otherwise. So it's certainly worth dealing with. And ally protection is one of the best ways to counteract damage overall. Just have to be careful that you don't kill Skullcrusher instead. Ogryn Legendaries have been expanded lately, so there are several really good Legendaries. It used to be about a year or two ago that there were just not a lot of Ogryns and they needed some help. Not so today. As far as the Legendaries of note, Biggin is an amazing AoE damage dealer, very good for clearing the waves, can be a damage dealer even in the boss fight. Very good. He can actually be a nightmare campaign farmer, so that's how hard he can hit. War Mother used to get a lot of hate, and honestly, she still does. But War Mother can actually do a lot of damage, both directly and with her bombs, although relying on her bombs is not the best strategy. I'd build her mostly to just straight up nuke. Ignatius can do a decent amount of damage. He's not as big a damage dealer as Biggin or even War Mother, but he provides burns that are irresistible. He also has a provoke, so he can play a little bit of a controller role as well. Gerptuk provides a lot of enhancement. He provides a lot of additional damage, some block buffs as well. Gerda can do a decent amount of damage through poisons. You've got Grazor, who can hit really hard. He's got a max HP attack. Those are generally your damage dealers. And Gurgo actually is another damage dealer as well. Don't forget about him. He can hit fairly hard, although he's not the greatest champ in the world, but he's definitely usable if you need some damage in Faction Wars. As far as the enhancers go, you've got Bellatar, who is the reviver. He also does a bunch of buffing, so he does some increased defense, increased attack. Can do some healing as well. A very good support champion. He should help carry you if you get him. Ugir as well, who can provide some additional support. He can counter some of the revives because he'll do an additional attack and revives. He does some buff stripping as well. can be useful in Faction Wars, although it's not ultra critical in Faction Wars. Definitely can be useful for some of the Valk waves, or if you get stuck on waves where people are doing a block debuffs and you don't know how to get through it. As far as some other protectors are concerned, Grizzor can provide some protection as well, because he can do a lot of the provokes as well. You can put him in stun set because he's called AoEs as well. Tarragon provides some general protection as well as buffage as well. Korgor can provide ally protection as well as a few other buffs as well. Shamrock provides a lot of general support. Drackle can even provide some shields if you need to use Drackle, although he is one of the weaker legendaries in this faction. So the Ogryns get the Brain Boss, the Incinerator. He is known for burning your champions. You hit him, he starts putting HP burn on your champions. You can also put poisons and true fears on your champions as well. So this is where things like block debuffs that the Man-Eaters can provide can be very crucial. Urgrims with some cleanse can be very critical. Continuous heals can actually help counteract this as well. That's where your gear grinders can certainly help with their healing and their additional healing as well. You've got even a Grush the Mangler can help keep you alive. Leech can be very effective against this boss as well. And of course, Ugo can give you a cleanse, and that can, as well as a juicy heal actually. So that cleanse can really, really help you get through this boss. This boss doesn't do tons of damage. It's more of a wear down boss, and while there's some decent damage in Ogryns, there's no pure nukers that are just going to annihilate the boss in one hit. So you're going to be wearing down the boss over time, and it's just a matter of getting enough damage on the boss before you get enough damage on yourself. So bring a decent amount of protection, some healing, maybe some cleansing, and much damage as you can, and it should get you through the boss. All right, so here's the general recommendations and list of champions that fall under the damage, enhancement, reviver, and protection. As you can see, there's not a lot of revivers as usual. There's not a lot of enhancers in this faction. It doesn't list as a lot of damage. There's a lot of champions that do okay damage in this faction, but there's an awful lot of protection in the Ogryn. But there's a lot of champions that can do double duty. So just looking at a sample team here, Ugo is a great champion, a very good carry, definitely a good enhancer and protector, one of the best decreased defense champions you can certainly have in here. Bellower is not only a great damage dealer, but also could be in stun gear, could be with accuracy enough, he can be an enhancer as well, because he can drop the damage, drop defense. And Grush, who you get for free at around day 240, is well worth investing in for this faction. He actually does a decent amount of damage. He can be used in other areas as well, but usually by about day 240, you might have no need for him. But he's actually worth building for Faction Wars still, even if you just build him to the 50. And then finally, Gear Grinder is a great reviver. If you need to use a reviver, obviously if you get Bellatar, use Bellatar instead. Bellatar does a lot more than Gear Grinder does. But Gear Grinder is also used in secret rooms, so he's well worth investing in. He can be usable in the HP secret rooms because he's an HP champion. And then finally, that leaves you room for one more champion on your team. So that's where another damage or protection as needed. And I say as needed because Bellower can be a damage dealer, an enhancer, and or a protector. It's going to be hard to build for all three of them in the same time, just depending on your gear. Now, I could do it with an endgame account, but with a game account that's trying to get Lydia, probably not so much. So are you building Bellower for damage, or are you building him for protection, or are you building him in stun? It's going to depend, and what you need in addition to that will depend. I think Bellower is probably best as damage, but you could certainly do an enhancement or protection. Grush is very similar. Grush provides a lot of healing, but he actually can hit pretty hard. So you put him with you max his crit rate out, you give him some crit damage, give him enough accuracy to land some debuffs, and he can still smack fairly hard for you, provide some damage and some protection without really compromising too much. Then that will help you quite a bit as well. Gear Grinder just needs to be in regeneration, and then you build another damage protector. Now, there's a lot of other champions that will disrupt this sample team. Urogrim as I said, is a hard carry for this faction. Ogryn makes this a lot easier to do. You'll still need Gear Grinder possibly to revive some people, or a Grush to be built, or a Bellower. But Gear uh, but Ogryn can be used very effectively with that sample team. If you have 2 man-eaters, you're going to build around those 2 man-eaters rather than build around the sample team, because you're going to have 2 man-eaters. You're probably running them in Faction Wars in your clan boss team. So you build them for your clan boss team, and then when you're using them in Faction Wars, you're going to want to swap out their attack banners for accuracy banners to give them enough accuracy to land debuffs while they're walking through Faction Wars. So they're definitely worth building and then building around. So there's definitely a lot of options in this faction. But the sample team here just gives you a good coverage of different champions, 2 rares, a free epic as well, and not a hard team to build, fortunately. So finally, my team, I had running the easy man-eater clan boss team. So I had 2 man-eaters over 200 speed. As I mentioned before, I took their attack banners off, put accuracy banners on, and that was enough accuracy for them to control the boss. And so basically I walked myself through Faction Wars, keeping my Unkillable up almost the entire time, using Bellower, who was my campaign farmer at the time, for damage, using War Mother for some damage. I actually did have to 6-star her to get enough damage out of War Mother to get some damage out. And then Gear Grinder was 50 in some regeneration gear and provided some additional healing. Now, it looks like I didn't need a lot of healing. Gear Grinder provided some, but man-eaters give me the Unkillable, and I generally had it up almost all the time because of how fast they were and the fact that I could steal turn meter, especially from the boss. Now, it wasn't a quick walkthrough because as they were built, I just, decided to manual my way through it, but it allowed me to take control and lock out specific champions using the man-eaters A2s and get through Faction Wars. And then War Mother, again, provided a decent amount of damage. I don't believe I built her with accuracy. I think I built her straight as a nuking damage dealer with spare gear I had, so she wasn't even a great nuker, but she was okay. Bellower was in most of my starter lifesteal gear, I believe, actually. So I built him in a lot of the starter lifesteal gear, got him up to about 200 and something speed, and he was farming campaign in 8 seconds for 12-3. And that worked just fine for doing damage in the Ogryn Tribe Faction Wars. So that was my team. Hopefully that gives you some inspiration as well to show you how you can apply the DERP method to getting through Faction Wars. So hopefully you're having fun with this. Hopefully this gives you a leg up in Faction Wars, and it's been fun talking with you guys. So I'm Bront CatHerder, and I will see you in the next video.